Great. Well, the floor is yours.
All right. Excited to chat with you guys today. Um, this is a topic that is important to me, and obviously you showed up today, so you're interested as well. I hope it's somewhat informal. Yes, I have a presentation, but with this small group, we can have a more intimate conversation. I don't want it to be one way. So after sort of each chapter, I'll stop and prompt for some questions, but feel free to put things in the chat. And if maybe Jerry or Alec, you guys could monitor that, that would be great. And then, I plan about 30 minutes or so of prepared presentation, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So I'm going to guess that your firm or your organization is not where you were 5 years ago. Hopefully, you're evolving and changing and growing. I'm also going to assume that your firm is not who you were 5 years ago. There's different people involved and a different makeup. So, yeah, of course, your firm is evolving, but unfortunately, there's a lag between what your firm is doing and where you want to be to how you're being perceived. So, I'm guessing that perhaps, despite all your great intentions and your new strategic plan, your reputation might be stuck a little bit in the past. And I'm guessing also that if you're on this call, you're probably related to marketing or human resources or operations or management in some way. So you probably have some ideas about how to fix this gap between how you're perceived and where you want to be and what you want to be perceived as. But there's some things that stand in the way. And so the things that stand in the way is a lot of times you need to get some sort of buy-in to do the thing that you want to do. And in order to prove that it's worthwhile to do the thing or things that you want to do, you kind of have to persuade, like, let's say you're in senior management, you have to persuade a board of directors. Or let's say you're a marketing director and a CMO, and you have to persuade the CEO. Well, I think that a brand audit can be a really effective way to have some tools and have some data and have something substantial to use to persuade to do whatever initiatives you want to do to get to where you want to be, rather than just going in and say, hey, I just feel like we need to do this. And yes, I'm big on feelings, but a lot of times those that hold the purse strings aren't as big on feelings. They're a little bit bigger on numbers and data. So a brand audit would give you the data and ammunition to be persuasive in getting things done. And also just illumination. Like, I think a lot of people within our organizations have blinders on because, I like to say, you can't read the label if you're inside the jar. And if you're inside the company, it's really tough to get a great perception of how the firm is perceived outside the company because you're just too inundated in it. Like, you're too mixed up in it to have a realistic and unbiased understanding. So I recommend a brand audit as a solution to this problem, but that term has a lot of different meanings. And I'm just going to clarify how I'm going to refer to it today. And you might have some other ideas, and I'd love to hear them because always looking to get better. So the way we define it and the way I've organized today's talk is in these chapters. So first, we get involved with internal research. So that means like reviewing a company's mission, vision, personality, positioning, looking at their story, their history, how they were founded, what the legacy of the company is, looking at some key plans that hopefully have been written down and are codified in some way. Hopefully they don't just live in the CEO or CMO's head. And those would be like a strategic plan, a marketing plan, or a business plan. And then also we think it's really important to understand where a firm or a company's revenue is coming from. We work pretty exclusively in AEC, and so it's B2B professional services. And we want to know which markets are producing what type of revenue, which services, and then which geographies, like which locations. And hopefully the CFO can help give that information because that's going to be informative in terms of how the firm moves forward. So internal research is part of the process. We also do what we call brand touchpoint scoring, where we look at every single brand touchpoint, everything from the name to the logo, color palette, how you answer the phone, what your email signature looks like, the website, any deliverables that you deliver, of it. We score it from -2 to 2, and then we give an analysis and a recommendation there on the right. I'm gonna turn off my video because I got a note my internet was unstable. Hopefully, you can still see my screen. We also do personal interviews where we interview internal staff and external staff. And then we do a competitive audit where we ask the firm to select 5 of the most likely competitors across the top. And then down the side, we'll co develop a set of 10 characteristics that we're going to review with them to be able to compare across this grid so that they can see where gaps and opportunities are, and basically just in a sheet, like a one sheet, see where they compare and how they compare against their competition. Sometimes that's as sort of basic as like, okay, what are the color palettes of the different firms so that we can see if there's any opportunities to differentiate them, maybe going forward, having more unique colors. And then at the end of the report, we give recommendations and we divide this up into different phases. And there's no obligation to move, but if the firm does want to move forward, we designate what they can do, what we think they can do by themselves. Like in this case, the client is in red. We think they could refine their purpose statement and vision by themselves. We'd be happy to help out. But sometimes I don't want to overwhelm the client and say, hey, you got to hire us to do all these things. So I throw them a few bones of like, hey, I think you could do this. And then the other things are things that we would recommend that they work on. Yeah, today's all about how to self audit. So basically, I'm kind of opening up our playbook and sharing what we do so that you could do this. And you might be wondering, well, if you offer this as a service, this might be kind of like the elephant in the room. Like, why are you just giving this away? Well, for one, candidly, not all firms can afford us to do this for them. I think it's just too important not to share. Maybe I'm getting older in my career and I just feel like I have this knowledge and I've developed really good systems. And I think that the knowledge should live on beyond our firm and beyond me. I'm not retiring anytime soon, but yeah, I'm just, I guess, feeling more generous in my older age. And I just kind of want to make sure you do it right. Like whether you hire us or not, or whether you hire a firm like Toki who can do this kind of service for you as well. Um, yeah, it's just important to me that it done right because I just see all boats lifting if we are really better at our crafts. And so, yeah, that's kind of my motivation. So here's what I hope you'll learn today. And this is how I've organized the talk. I hope you'll leave understanding kind of why you might do a brand audit and when in the life cycle of your company, who you need to involve, the process for getting it done, and what are the deliverables that will make up the audit. So any questions about like what I've said so far, where we're going, why I'm sharing this with you, what I'm going to accomplish, or what we're going to talk about?
No, thanks for sharing, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so
All
let's
right.
go. Sorry, what was that? All right, we'll keep going. Why and when. So, well, the why is you probably as the marketing lead want insight on how prospects perceive your firm. And prospects can be manyfold, but here I'm specifically talking about prospective clients and prospective talent, employees that you want to recruit and clients that you want to recruit. And as we'd said before, your firm has evolved, but maybe your reputation is stuck in the past. So you might be wondering, okay, well, yeah, but what specifically, let's say your reputation is stuck in the past, but what's holding it back? Like what specific touch points are being influential on your reputation? And a brand audit will help you identify those particular ones so you can work on improving them And hopefully, the sum of that is improving your reputation. And I'm guessing, yeah, you kind of need some proof to persuade others, even if you know what needs to be done. And this is what a brand audit. So when should we audit our brand? Well, I think perhaps every 3 to 5 years would be a great idea to take a look. So right before you create a strategic plan, so that you have some data and background that'll help inform that strategic plan. But if you've already done it, it certainly wouldn't hurt to do it after. So then it would work in alignment, because hopefully within that strategic plan, you have very specific initiatives that you want to pull off and get done. And then combining that with the brand audit would help clarify some of those initiatives, or add a little color, or maybe even a little motivation around why you want to get those things done. And then I think if you were going to embark on a big initiative like a rebrand or a new website, it would be really great to have some form of this to help inform that, because if you understand how you're perceived, then you can either like lean into your strengths or try to mitigate and improve some of those weaknesses. And then, of course, pain is always a great motivator. So, like, if you find that you're losing pursuits and you're not getting added to the short list after your proposals, or maybe you've had this max exodus of talent, uh, let's find out why. And this can shine a light on some of these areas that need some help, because I mean nobody likes pain, right? So hopefully this brand audit could be a slight pain reliever to help you move forward. This is the order and the content that, or sort of like where it would fit in a timeline of initiatives. So we think the brand audit would be first, and then this lists all the things that are included in the brand audit. That could take about 4 to 6 weeks. Then from that audit, you want to clarify your what we call brand strategy, or some call it brand foundation, which is getting really clear on mission, vision, values, positioning, having your messaging in place, and a brand plan for the next three things that you're going to execute on, which might be, if the brand identity needs some help, naming and visual brand identity, and then all the different touch points from the website to your proposals to your brochures, even signature or signage and vehicles, and then ongoing marketing consultant is part of it. If you are going to be doing a rebrand, then kind of really think through how it's going to get rolled out, and so forth. So this, just in terms of like where it fits within other initiatives, usually pretty much at the front, and it's research to help inform a lot of other potential initiatives. So any questions about that, like process, timing, sequencing, before we get into who to involve?
I have one question before we go forward.
Yeah.
So you've talked about like when, but what about frequency?
Yeah, so I think that every 3 to 5 years
Okay.
is a good benchmark that would work
Kind
out
of
pretty
like
well.
in line with the strategic plan.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then the only caveat to that is if some of those other things are true, like you're losing people or using projects, and then maybe you would want to disrupt that pacing or rhythm of every 3 to 5 years. But I would like put 3 to 5 on your calendar, and then of course you can update that as needed.
Oh, thanks.
All right. So who should be involved in this? Because I really firmly believe that assembling the right team is going to have a great impact on the success of this particular initiative. You've got to have somebody who's the champion. Most likely, it's somebody like you all who are on this call, and I don't know what your titles are, but somebody who's like the lead marketing person in your organization, the brand champion. Maybe the title is CMO, maybe it's COO, maybe it's director of marketing. Whoever the highest ranking marketing person is should take the lead on making this happen. You should also include your boss, or whoever the sort of most high ranking person is in your organization. It's a little bit dependent on how big your company is. But if you're like less than 1,000 people, I think it makes sense to include the CEO, because I think this has wide ramifications, and it's going to have the ability for that person to be effective. And I think they should take ownership for one, but also I think you need a certain amount of political weight on your committee to help make sure that this initiative gets disseminated and spread across your organization with the same gravitas that it deserves. Sometimes, unfortunately, when marketing goes rogue and does some of these things on their own, they're not taken as seriously as I think they should be. And so sometimes you just need a little political firepower in your wheelhouse, and that could be having somebody like this on your committee. And then I think in total, you should flesh out your committee with a couple more people, but try to keep the committee less than 5 people. I do think it's very effective to have diversity for all the reasons we know that diversity is great. So different age, gender, different positions, different geographic. So, choose wisely. I think adding like a real up and comer or two that are future leaders in the organization is really wise. Um, but yeah, if you can, including the marketing lead and the CEO, maybe 3 other people makes a really good number of 5. I think odd numbers are better in case you have to vote on things. Then you won't have deadlock. So 5 is really a great number. And then eventually you're going to select about 5 or so internal interviewees that don't have to be and shouldn't be on the committee, because we want a little bit of a non-biased perspective when we interview those. So within your organization, plan on selecting 5 internal interviewees, and then also 5 external interviewees. And so here's the question that's sort of another elephant in the room is yeah, talking about how you can self-audit. And I do think you can do it. But I also think I should share what I believe to be sort of pros and cons of hiring an external consultant, maybe for part of the things. So maybe you do the majority of these things yourself, but you hire an external consultant to do something like the interviewing, so that the interviewees, whether it be you interviewing like clients or even internal staff, feel safe to share as candid as they can. Um, I'm starting to include my bias already, I realize. So I'm going to try not to do that and just walk you through what I think are the pros and cons of working with an external consultant to do a brand audit. So one of the pros is certainly objectivity. If we get hired, I don't really have a stake in the outcome, uh, other than I want it to be really illuminating. Sometimes there's this perception that if you do it internally, like, oh, you're just doing this because you want to get buy-in for some initiative that you already want to do, which is one of the things that I said in the beginning might be a motivation. So there's some validity to that, right? So I think objectivity is a pro of working with a consultant. Um, the database of best practices is something that I don't think you can replicate from an internal perspective. The fact that we've done 35 plus of these, over the last 20 years, um, allows us to have this database of best practices, and we can sort of compare and say, hey, compared to your peers, this is where you score on that, rather than having it just be a sort of a guess or a shot in the dark. So that is really beneficial. Accountability. There's definitely something about when you hire somebody, you have an agreement and it's got a time and dollar thing amount to it. Like, we have to get that thing done, in the 3 to 4 months that we've committed to. What I've found is sometimes when clients take this on with great intentions internally, is they don't quite have the same accountability because other things come up that are more important. They've got to get that proposal out, or they've got to train the staff for a presentation interview. And that unfortunately ends up taking precedent over this brand initiative. So there's something about that accountability of like, yeah, there's real deadlines, there's real dollars, and everybody, right or wrong, seems to take it a little more seriously. And then finally, and related to that, is this almost higher perceived value aspect of it. When you do hire somebody that's good at what they do and they deliver you those results, there is this perception that even if this somebody within the organization said the same thing, and this is absolutely not fair, but I guess it's just human nature, is that if you hear it from somebody you've hired, there's going to be this higher perceived value because they're thought of, hopefully, as an external expert at what they do. So those are the pros. The cons are, yeah, it can be expensive. The timing of it may not be exactly when you want to do it. You have to make sure that that consultant is available. Um, and then there may be some concerns about privacy. Although I will say we're always happy to sign a non-disclosure, but maybe there's just a reason why you want to keep this whole thing internal and you just don't want anything leaking. There may be some top secret plans that are in place that, yeah, you just don't want to open up to anybody from the outside. Any questions about that? Because I do think this is important. Pros and cons of working with an outside consultant. And like I said, it could be sort of parsed out. Like they're going to be part of the items that are done internally and part of them done externally. Although I think for continuity, it's probably a little better to just commit to all or nothing. Okay, all good on that? All right, so let's walk through the process, what to do and in what particular order. So I mentioned the internal, excuse me, research, looking at the 50 plus brand touch points and scoring those, the competitive audit, personal interviews, internal and external. And I should just mention, I mentioned doing about 5 of these, and usually that's a shock to a client. Say, wow, you're really that's a big enough data set to get a realistic understanding of who we are. And surprisingly, it is. What we found is, we've had clients insist on doing 10, 15, even 20, and we just start to get the same answers over and over again. And it's significantly more expensive if we're interviewing that many people. So we found that about 5, maybe 7 is plenty. And so that might be a shock to you, but I'm just sharing kind of from my expertise because I do think some efficiency in this process is important. And then finally, you sum all this up in a findings and recommendations, which is either a report and a presentation or just a presentation, depending on your organization. And if you're the type of organization that's had a lot of layers, and you like to send reports up and down the food chain, then you're going to want the report because you're going to want something written and tangible. Um, but if it's a smaller organization, you can probably get away with that just happening in a presentation format. Of course, we'll always deliver like the slide deck with it, but it's a truncated version. The report is much more thorough. The report, when we deliver it, has the transcripts from all the interviews and all the scoring.
David, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
What are your recommendations on how public you should be with the results of
Yeah,
these type
that's
of
a great
audits?
question.
Like, what are, leadership certainly, but is this something that you would recommend sharing with all your staff or talking about it at like a town hall?
Yeah. So I think if anybody is like involved in the process, like let's say you have an interviewee that participated, anybody involved should receive the information because I'm just a big fan of kind of closing a loop and letting somebody who, you know, gave their time to be interviewed learn about what they said and what everybody else said. I think leadership is certainly critical. And then it's really varied. What we've found is that some organizations like to keep it really tight and make decisions about whether or not they're going to accept the recommendations or not. Some like to socialize it in, like you said, a town hall. And I guess it just relates a lot to the culture of your firm. I mean, if I were to make a global recommendation, I think we're in an era where the more transparency across the organization, the healthier the organization. So I think you should share it with anybody that wants to read it. Now, not everybody will want to read it because it's just maybe not related to their job function. And some people are very linear and like, oh, this is outside my purview. I don't want to spend extra time reading this. So, I- yeah, if you had to pick one or the other, I would say share it generously.
Yeah, I imagine I feel sometimes with the brands when I was doing this, like in-house, you're trying to convince people of your brand position and to get them to buy into it. But showing them your brand position alongside these the competitor research or kind of putting data behind it, it makes it will maybe give it more value or legitimacy as a strategy, not just sometimes people are like, oh, it's just marketing language. It's like, no, it's not. It's real value and real language. It has a purpose. Um,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of using a little bit of peer pressure to motivate people and yeah, showing like how well the competitors might be doing, hopefully might light a fire. And so yeah, I think that can work really well. And yeah, having some context for like, yeah, this just didn't come out of thin air. The reason our positioning is this is because this is how it relates to all our competitors. And so yeah, I love what you're saying there. Thanks, Laura.
David, I have a question as well, and maybe this is more, I don't know that this changes anything that you've said, but I'm just curious as you're giving us the process here, if you have any thoughts. I'm in a really small organization of about 40 people. And so I'd be curious as you're doing this, if things scale, like the scale of the organization changes the process at all, or if that just doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think the process is really the same. And I think that the numbers that I've given you, like keep your committee to less than 5, interview 5 people. We've done that for firms that are like 30 and we've done it for firms that are 2,000 and it doesn't change. What may change is like how wide you related to the last question, like how wide you share the results. Um, but I especially for a firm that's 40, I think that you should share it pretty openly and try to get people on board with what's being recommended and what, initiatives come out of this so that you do have that internal support. So that if in fact, like you do a rebrand or a new website, people kind of know why and then they know it's happening. And then when you roll it out, and you should roll it out internally first, and then people have the support to explain it to a client if the client asks, like, why'd you guys do this? Or what's new about this new website kind of thing. So the first part in the process is this internal research where I mentioned you research all these things. And it's mostly like when we're doing it, just reading these things and taking notes and looking for interesting opportunities. Like let's say there's something really cool that happened in the company's history about why the firm was founded, taking note of that and saying, hey, maybe that could be a catalyst for something in the future. And who knows, just like making little notes to yourself about potential opportunities for the brand going forward. And then auditing the touch points. Yeah. So I think I talked about all this, what a touch point could be. We have a huge list. Contact me if you would like that. But the usual suspects are, of course, the brand name, the logo, business card, website, how the receptionist works, or if you have an automated phone thing, email signatures, like anything that somebody would form an opinion about your company based on interacting with that particular touch point. Maybe they meet you at a trade show and your trade show booth of the brand touch points. Anyway, then the sum of all these touch points, of course, equals your brand. So yeah, it's important to score these and find the ones that are lagging so that they can be improved upon and discover the ones that are strengths to lean into. This is what that scoring, if somebody does order the report version, this is what they get. If not, then it gets summarized in a presentation. And then I showed you this is the process for how to do the competitive audit. First, identify 5 firms that you currently are or would like to be competing with. And I'm a big fan of like looking 3 to 5 years out because your brand should be a beacon for where you want to go, not necessarily where you are now or where you've been in the past. So maybe you want to level up and there's competitors that fall into that category, include those. And then identify down the left-hand column the 10 features you can compare. And then you end up with this grid. The white one, to protect the innocent, I took their logo out. But this is for an interior design firm, and what their competitors look like. Then we do these personal interviews. What I've found is that you should ask for a 20 to 30-minute interview max. More than that, it's just too big of an ask. And within those 30 minutes, you can get in about 10 or 12 questions, depending on how talkative the interviewee is. And, the interviewer should be skilled and have the latitude to ask follow-on questions if they hear something really compelling. Well, tell me more about that. because that really sounds interesting, and get the person to start to open up. 5 external interviews. So you can have the internal ones be a little bit longer because in some cases they're being almost mandated by their boss to do the interview. But I think the external, I would ask for 20. Usually, if it's smooth and it's going well, at 20 minutes, I'll say, "Hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I have a couple more questions. Are you okay?" But I'm also very content to stop at 20. I don't expect them to go longer than 20. That's what I promised them. But what I found is that people are usually pretty generous, and they'll say, "Yeah, no, this is good, and I hope it's helpful. I'm happy to answer the rest of your questions." Or some people say, "Yeah, you can even follow up with me written later or whatever." So within 20 minutes, you can get in about 8 to 10 questions. And what we do is obviously we have a script and we prepare the questions. And when I'm working with a client, we'll co-develop these questions because there may be some things that they're very particular about very interested in knowing. So if we co-develop these questions, then they just are better and the client feels like they're more bought in. So I think don't create these questions just in a vacuum. Socialize them with some of your peers if you're doing this internally. And you could do like a mock interview just to sort of see how they flow and see what the answers are and see if there's any redundancy and make sure that you're getting real clean, clear answers from the questions. And just when you're talking to before you start the interview, tell the interviewee that you're not looking for testimonials. You don't want them to like sound really eloquent and really fancy. You're just really looking for unprepared, unvarnished truth, real candid responses to the questions. And then also tell them that you're not going to be attributing what they say specifically to them. So I'm not going to say, "Hey, or in the report, Reagan said exactly this." I'm going to be reporting what Reagan said, but I'm going to be reporting it in aggregate as a group, not attributing specific names to specific individuals. And I hope and people say that it frees them up to be really candid about what they think about the brand. And it's really key to write the questions first. This is one of the biggest tips I can give you. You may be tempted to select the people, but I wouldn't do that first. I would write the questions first, figure out what you really want to know, and then be very specific about which people you select, both from the external perspective and the internal perspective, because you're going to know based on those questions who is going to be able to provide you with the best answers. And by best answers, I don't mean like get the answers you want to hear. I mean, who's going to have the best like insight to be able to provide you with the answers that you want to know about. All right, so that's that. And then the final deliverables are and so this is how we structure our proposals to clients. They can choose the pro plan or the expert plan. And the only difference between the two is, like I said, one includes a report and one doesn't. If they choose the report, then they get the scoring of all the brand touch points. They get the transcripts, and that's really the big difference. So there's a little added value, and with that added value is a higher fee. But if it's a small organization, then the presentation usually just suffices. So it just depends on whether they want all that. Now, we give them insight into all the, interviews and the scoring, but in the slide deck, it's just not nearly as thorough. So this would be each little dot would be, an element of the audit, and it either gets delivered, like I said, in a presentation, a report, or both. So this is kind of like the report. I don't know why I put first there. Anyway, this just kind of gives you a table of contents of what the report would look like. We include a paragraph on why they're doing it now. We don't bury the lead. We start with the recommendations right in the beginning. We give specific recommendations that relate to the interviews and why we came to those conclusions. We do the competitor audit. We do the benchmarking with the scoring. And then at the end of the report, in the appendix, are the transcripts from the 2 sets of interviews. So in the report or in the presentation, what we'll do is we'll show all the things that a firm maybe could do, but identify the things that are specific recommendations here in red. So let's say, for example, what we learned in auditing that firm here in the brand foundation section was that their purpose statement and their positioning were actually quite solid. So they don't need to touch those, but they do need to refine their vision, values, and personality. And that's just kind of identifies. So think of this as like a giant menu, and the red things are the things that we think they should order from that menu in order to improve their brand. And then this is the same data, but just organized in a different way, with a Gantt chart of how they would accomplish getting these things done if we were to work together on those. First, we would start with brand foundation, although if we're starting with a new website, that actually we could start some of the research and beginning there. But this is just a sequencing of how the things should happen, and it's at a loose timing in terms of months required to get these things done. Again, we divide it out between things we think the client can get done, and then things that if they hired us as a consultant, we would help them get done. Get Yeah. And included in the report, there are some like fancy graphs about where they fit, like in terms of brand colors, to try to identify some opportunities. Let's say all the competitors in their space use blue, which is quite common in AEC. So there might be some opportunities in the warm spectrum. Well, and same with typography as well. Everybody loves the sans serif, but it doesn't differentiate you very well. And then in the presentation, this is sort of what the agenda looks like for that. It's similar, but a little bit abbreviated. And we kind of say like, hey, there's a lot to discuss here. Let's not get into an individual debate about each recommendation that we have. We can do that at the end and in a subsequent meeting, just to try to keep things on pace and keep the momentum going. Otherwise, you can really get down into a rabbit hole about whether or not the committee listening to the presentation agrees or doesn't agree. So let's say, for example, there was an initiative like we think the firm should have a new brand name, and then we would get into like all the different details around that. Um, and so anyway, in the presentation, basically kind of like rationalizing and also giving them an insight into if they did change, these are some of the things that would benefit, and kind of like sharing a little bit of best practices about what a new name should do. A good name is memorable, unique, sound and look great. Anyway, this is like very specific, but I'm just kind of trying to give you some insight into like what our deliverables look like so you can also be specific in those and not just say you should do it, you should have a new name, but also like get people thinking about what the next step is to help get a little bit of buy-in to take on that initiative. So, and then I even show them some examples of, when we had a naming client and this particular client wanted to take his name, the owner wanted to take his name off the door, literally because he was eventually going to retire and he wanted to consider ownership transition and also just didn't want it to fall under him. So then it was switched from Sean Nelson to Beechcraft. And then we kind of show him some eye candy to get him excited. And the big test for a branding program for a construction firm is, will the guys in the field wear the shirts? And so, yeah, in this case, they do. So this was a really nice testimonial that came from a client of Beechcraft who told us that just from an outside, from his perspective, everything was really terrific, which is really great. You don't usually get this. I just happen to have a relationship with this firm also, so it worked out, quite well. I walk them through the process of naming, and then, okay, so let's get to this point, and we're almost wrapped up, and we can answer some questions and so forth. So after you give this presentation, you make a bunch of recommendations, then what should happen? Well, either the firm or whoever you're presenting to will accept the recommendations or not. And that probably is going to happen in a separate meeting. I don't think it's realistic. I think you need to give people time to digest the recommendations, but not too long. So I would say like scheduling a meeting a week from when you delivered the recommendations to determine what they want to do and what they think. If yes, for us, that means we will provide some more formal estimates for the particular initiatives that we're going to do. If you're doing this all yourself, then I think you can also estimate, there might not be dollars involved, but there'll be timing and manpower. So estimate those things and then get approval to move forward. And then in this case, we were going to get started with brand personality attributes, then naming, then branding, then marketing collateral. So it was just showing them kind of the order of things based on the recommendations for this particular initiative. So this is very specific to a certain situation. So that's the whole deck in terms of how I think you should do it. So hopefully gave you some insight on why and when. Hopefully you have an idea of like the process and the ultimate deliverables for how you can succeed in doing this. So here's how to get a hold of me on all the socials and LinkedIn and so forth. Um, and then, yeah, happy to follow up with you via email or however you want. But yeah, any questions or comments about what we talked about?
I have a question about marketing team involvement. So if you're doing this in-house, when you listed the 5 people that you would involve on the committee, the only kind of marketing representative was, let's say, the leader, person on this call. But thinking about like opportunities to involve your team members if you have them so that they're a part of doing the research or whatever, like how would you maybe address that a little bit? Like
Yeah, so I
spreading
think,
the love and spreading the work out?
let's say if that was really important to you, you could have your marketing lead, your CEO, and you could flesh out the rest of the committee with 3 other marketing folks. You could also have some people shadow. So maybe they're not officially part of the committee, but they are sitting in on some meetings as sort of like an auditor or an observer. Maybe they don't have, if there's going to be like voting on things. So let's say somebody makes all the recommendations and the committee should be the one that kind of votes on which ones move forward. Maybe the whole marketing staff could sit in on all or part of the meetings, depending on the bandwidth. And then they're gaining insight into the whole process. They're learning about it. They're like involved, but maybe they're not taking up like a voting seat in as part of the process.
And then can you talk a little bit more like about the scoring that the numbers that you're using? I think some of
Yeah.
the conversations that I've been having throughout my career is kind of like how do you like value or measure brand
Yeah.
awareness or measure like brand just feels a lot softer than some of our more digital.
Yeah, and I think the first thing is to admit that it is in fact
Yeah.
softer, right? So let's not pretend that you can put a really clean score, right? Not everything that's measurable should be measured or whatever. There's a good quote, and that's not it. But anyway, so this is why I am a little biased on working with an outside consultant is beneficial because we have this database, and when we're scoring a brand name, we have this kind of rubric of what we think makes up a good brand name. And then we also look at your competitors and what's happening in the space. And so the -2, is you're not doing well. -1 is you're doing a little bit better, but it's still not great. 0 is kind of meh, not good, not bad. 1, I think you get it. Um, so I think a combination of scoring, because I do think something visual and something somewhat numeric is helpful, but you've got to combine that with the rationalizations or the comments. So I'll just give you a very simple example here. This firm's brand name was Dunigan Diviero Design Group. It's 10 syllables. So in the comments, I'm saying it's just too long. Anything longer than 7 syllables, the sort of best practices, it's going to get abbreviated, and that's what's already happening. People don't know how to when they read these names, they don't know how to pronounce them. It's making an awkward like mouth feel. So like I'm going through this whole thing about rationalizing why I came up with -1.5 as their score. Um, so yeah, I mean the number thing, yes, it's definitely a little bit subjective, and in some things, I just leave a number off. In fact, there's some things that just it would be I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Well, like in this case, they just didn't have any brand fonts. I didn't
Yeah.
wanna, like, have a bunch of -2s to make them, I guess, feel
Beat 'em
bad.
up. Yeah.
But there's nothing to score, I should say, so I just leave it blank
Okay.
in that case.
If you're doing this in-house, would you recommend like is this the committee talking it through or is this
I think
everyone
it should be.
individually scoring and
No, I
then
think it should be well, that's interesting. It could be either a committee talking it through, or it could be the committee scoring individually and then coming together and having a powwow about or like a little debate about like let's land on something that the committee can live with as a score. I do think it should be more than one person, because it's just a little bit too much power for one person in the organization, and I think it'll help you rationalize what you've done if you can say, yeah, no, this is what the committee came up with, not just me, kind of thing.
Would you recommend and please anyone else jump in if you have questions, but I think, we understand the value of each of these things, like thinking about a brand name being hard to say and how many syllables it's supposed to be, or like how the flexibility required of a logo.
Yeah.
Like, we know that. Would you recommend if you were involving people like your CEO or other leaders doing a bit of an maybe education before the scoring or talking
Um,
through each of these things?
I don't know that you need to
Giving them
educate.
criteria?
I don't know that you need to educate them before you do the scoring, but I do think you should educate them if it's one of the recommendations. And that's
Okay.
why I was showing you like here, where I was saying, hey, your firm needs a new brand name. And by the
Here's
way,
why.
this is why, and these are the best practices so that they can contextualize why you're making that particular recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise it's a little bit like if it's just not within their wheelhouse, and then it's
'Cause
like,
they might be
okay,
like, "I love this name. I've
yeah,
been here for
yeah. And
25 years, and it's great."
right, and gosh, naming and logos can get so emotional and people get so attached, especially if it's been around for long. And there is benefit to legacy and history, and I always respect that, but it also may be hurting you more than you ever know, and we think you should at least address it. Or you at least should make a conscious decision like, okay, we think that, yes, it's not a great name if we were to start over, but starting over would be so painful and costly, like updating all the signage and all the everything, that it isn't worth it. And that's at least you've made an informed decision rather than like just letting inertia or momentum continue to use that name year after year after year.
One thing that I would suggest, because I agree with David, I would not necessarily do the education up front. I would ask them to score it. And then what I like to do is ask everyone to explain their score. Just
Yeah.
how did you arrive at this number? And then once you've got all that out on the table, sometimes you don't need to do the education because their gut already tells them that it's a problem. So just go with it. You've
Yeah.
got the buy-in that you need. And in other cases, you might at that point do some education. Hey, I was doing some research or I was talking to so-and-so. Here's some best practices. I want to share these, and then give everybody an opportunity to update or change their score. Or does that just engender conversation? Because when you talk about things like it's hard to say, or whatever the issues are around a name, for example, once you bring that up, sometimes the conversation will go in the direction that you're hoping it's going to go, which is, yes, this is something that we need to consider changing. In other cases, it just raises the awareness, like David was saying, and gives you a chance to at least make that informed decision, right? Yes, we know it's hard to pronounce. Okay, so what what can we do about that? Are there things that we can do? There was a um, video that went viral a couple of years ago from the Velcro brand, and Velcro is a brand name, and they have to go to great lengths to protect their brand name, and you're supposed to generically call it hook and loop or what have you. They did this hilarious video that really was their legal team doing this literal song and dance about hook and loop versus Velcro, because they recognized that they had to do something. So the same thing could be there if it's like, it's difficult to say. We know it's difficult to say. We're going to create like a little video to help you learn how to say it. But you've sort of exposed the issue that needs to be addressed.
The Velcro name
questions?
is an interesting one. There's a really great story about, well, just the whole discovery of Velcro, and it's like the Swiss French guy, and Vel is like comes from velour, smooth, and crow is like crochet to attach,
Mhm.
Velcro. Um, and yeah, anyway, it's a fascinating naming and product development story in and of itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
worth checking out.
Yeah.
Other questions, Laura? These have been good. Others? Or Laura, if you have more, we'll take. All right. Well, in
Well,
that
yeah,
case,
that's it from my perspective. We're, I think, right at 11 or West Coast time, 2 East.
yep.
Jerry, you have any announcements, stuff coming up you want to share about?
Of course, we'll have office hours next month. It will be on the 17th. And we don't have we have a guest lined up. I just need to make some confirmation, and then it'll come out in email. But excited for that. And David, thank you for this. It is, I'll echo, what David said. I think at the beginning in the why share this, um, and really echo all the things that he said there. One is, part of the reason for office hours is just to get this kind of information out in people's hands. Um, it, the magic is not in everything that David just shared. The magic is when you are engaging someone like David or Toki to come in and help be that objective third party who has seen so many of these cases before and can help guide the process for you. But that doesn't mean that you can't do some of these things on your own. And in some cases, maybe you should do some of it or begin the process. I think especially when you're dealing maybe with a organization that's reluctant to get started, reluctant to engage with somebody from the outside, you can start using some of these tools that David was sharing to help get that process started. And the further you get into it, the more it may become evident that in the conversations that you're having with that team that you've assembled, that having somebody from the outside come in and help and provide some of that objectivity or get good input through that interview process is valuable. So, by all means, please take what you learned today. David, is this deck something we're able to share to the group?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely.
Great. So we'll get a copy of this along with the recording and share this back out to everyone. And, if you are looking for someone to help with this process, please reach out to David, reach out to Toki. There's others within the AEC community that are generous with their time and knowledge. And, if you need somebody to actually engage as a consultant, any of us are happy to give you a proposal around that. All right. Thank you all for attending. And thank you,
you.
David, for presenting.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.